Good morning. I'm Marilyn Martin Ott, and I was honored to be selected to lead the first public tour through Blanchard Springs Caverns on July the 7th of 1973. It was quite an honor, and I enjoyed greatly my time as a tour guide. I can remember a lot of fun times that I had with some new friends, a lot of funny things that happened in the cave, and a few scary things. I can remember being shocked and amazed when Peter and Tim went scuba diving from the natural entrance of Blanchard Springs down to the springs underground with scuba gear, and something I would never do then and couldn't certainly not do now. And I also remember some personal experiences of my own as we went through Roland Cave, exploring areas that with the St. Louis Grotto that had not been explored before. I remember Glenda, after one of our adventures, crawling through a tiny opening behind the giant flowstone and saying that must be what being born is all about. Quite an interesting experience. And my most memorable experience, however, was getting to meet my husband, Stan Ott, at the cave. And when we tell people we met in a cave, they ask me if I had very good vision underground. I guess I did. We've been married for almost 50 years now. Stan Ott and Bob Reeves joined the initial group of 31 tour guides in September of 73, and Bob went on to be the longest serving cave administrator at Blanchard Springs Caverns before he retired, and Stan went on to be the longest serving husband. So good job for both of them, and I would have to say that that was my most memorable event, was getting to meet my husband. Thank you.
John Camper, JOHNCAMPER, and I live in Rogers, Arkansas. You do have my permission for use for publication.
What would you like people to know about the first year that you took people through Blanchard Springs Caverns that first year?
Penny, one of the most memorable things for me was the excellent training that we had. The early 1970s was quite a changing period in our nation, and people were more concerned with interchanging with other people. And we were also becoming more concerned about the land around us, the earth beneath our feet, and then our relationship to that. And this whole facility, this cavern, was developed with preservation in mind, and also not preservation to the point that people could not enjoy it. It was here for everybody to enjoy.
What did you personally take from this experience?
Many things. I've been in sales all my life, and a lot of the interactional things that we were taught, leadership, and the leadership going through the caverns with interacting with all these people allowed me to become okay with talking to people and have the confidence to do that. And knowledge-based confidence gets you a long way.
It does. Thank you for being one of the originals.
Thank you.
I'm Larry Poff, one of the first tour guides here. I'm a local native of Stone County, and this was a change for my life also, as it was many. And you have my permission to use any and all of this that you can use.
For publication?
For publication.
Historical archives?
Historical archives, yes,
Good.
ma'am.
Good. All right.
Growing up here, we were familiar with Half Mile Cave. We came to the springs. We'd bring watermelons and put them in the water to cool them while we played. I was a kid growing up here. We had no idea that all of this was under the ground, other than there was just a big hole called Half Mile Cave, a half mile above the springs. And for me to be blessed to be able to work here, we became a family. There were 31 of us that were hired, and we made relationships that last a lifetime, and we cherish them. And we were, as John said, we received great training. If you'd known me before, I was a very shy person. And you can't do 5 tours a day and be a very shy person. So it really helped prepare me for the future and the jobs that I did after I left here. but it was a great experience for me.
You're a man of God.
I am.
When you first saw that, and when you tried to tell people about it, did it help you internalize and give to other people the story of creation, so to speak? I mean,
It's, I see that every morning when I get up and see the sun come up and hear the birds waking up outside. And I see it in the evening when the sun goes down. And the older I get, when I was young and here, I probably didn't appreciate it as much as I do now. Like right now, the dogwoods are beautiful. He made it all, and he made it all for us to enjoy. And I'm forever thankful. He's my Savior, and he's going to call one of these days, and I'm going to fly away.
that'll be a good day, huh?
It'll be a great day, yes. I heard a preacher the other day say, you need to be prepared to die, and instantly I thought, or be prepared to fly, whichever comes first.
Exactly. Thank you for telling me personal things.
My name's Herb Evans, Herb Evans. I was one of the original tour guides here at Blanchard back in 1973, and then I became one of the supervisory guides a year or 2 years after that. And I get my permission to use this however you want to use this, short of blackmail.
Okay.
One of the first memories that I have, one of the things that I remember is the first trip down the elevator, stepping into the lobby downstairs. The odor stays with me. The smell that was down there is just ingrained in my memory. Stepping through the airlock into the cavern itself and seeing how magnificent that was for the very first time, not realizing, having spent all the time up here, what was right below our feet, and then getting to take people down there and show them what was down there, the amazing world that's below us. So that, I don't know, that just stays with you. It was
When you delivered that message, did you ever see the light bulbs come on with them? That they got it?
It's dark down there.
No, I mean
So-
that they, but that they got the message you were trying to give them.
Maybe some, but I can't say that I could really see people having an epiphany. But I hope that people picked up from going down below and the tours we could take them on, the things that we could tell them, what they were seeing was special and needed to be protected. When we took people on tours, we went to lengths to explain to them how we protected the cave, the things we had to do to keep the cave alive, why we had airlock doors to stop the flow of air because that wasn't natural and would dry the cave out. We tried to show them, how important the cave was, but how important it was for us to show it to them and preserve it, but share it.
We had a purpose. Did that guide the rest of your career in the Forest Service?
I think it sounds a little corny, but public service is kind of what always guided my career. And I was able to stay with the Forest Service for over 27 years, and always in public-facing positions. So that, just doing public service was a good part of what I thought I was doing. I don't know if that explains or answers your question.
It does. It's amazing.
All right.
Thank you.
What else can I do for you?
Well, anything that you think people should know, if they look at your interview 100 years from now, and they may, what should they know about opening the U.S. Forest Service first and only cave system, Blanchard Springs Caverns?
Oh boy.
And that time.
When we did this, tourism wasn't new, but maybe this kind of tourism was, where people could go into Carlsbad Caverns or they could go into Mammoth Cave, but they weren't getting the interpretive part of it. they were just kind of turned loose in those caves at that time. Here we took people through and we tried to show them what was happening, how water, rain coming and trickling through the ground was dissolving out minerals, redeposited them, making the formations that were in the cave, and how the things that we did up here affected the stuff that was going on down there. A lot of people, maybe that opened a few eyes, that they could see the connection between up here and down there.
I'm John Thomas, Johnthomas.
Okay.
And I was a tour guide at Blanchard Caverns when the cave opened in 1973. And then I was a guide supervisor a year later and worked here for about another year and a half and then got transferred. And I give permission for the Stone County Historical Society to save this in any way that they would like, in any form they would like. And,
How about the newspaper?
and they can use it in the newspaper too if they'd like.
Tell me about being here that first year, something you'd want people to know if they saw this interview 100 years from now. What was it like?
Well, one of the things that I remember the most was our training, and they worked on us not so much to know about caves and geology as they worked on us with interpersonal relations skills, because we were all strangers to each other, and we were going to be leading a group of 30 strangers who were all strangers to each other. There might be some small family groups, but basically nobody knew each other, and so we had to learn how to control those situations and defuse, bad situations and get people to move through the cave, because we had a time frame that we had to keep. So I remember that, but what it did for me was it formed some strong relationships with the people that I worked with. And those last today. I feel like we're all a bunch of cousins or something. We just all meet each other, and it's as if it was just yesterday that we parted, even though it might be 25 years down the road. And the cave itself, it was a remarkable thing because, number one, the Forest Service was operating it, not the National Park Service. It was a very unusual situation in that respect. Number two, it was the cave find of the century at the time. A lot of the caves didn't have running water in them, where this cave has always got water coming in somewhere. So that was an unusual thing about it. It was in Arkansas, which is my home state. And it was going to be, it was going to be a really big, popular thing for a lot of people to come. So it was the start of something. It wasn't that we came into the middle of it and we were just a part of it. We were at the very beginning. So to me, those things stick out in my mind.
When you took people down, people from Arkansas, thousands and thousands of them came to see this treasure. Nobody had any idea that it was here. How would you describe their reaction to what you showed them there?
I think everybody's reaction was pretty much the same, and it is just staggering. A lot of people thought that we built it, that we made the formations, that it was something out of a Disneyland, it was from Disneyland or Disney World or something that humans had formed. They couldn't understand that it was just a natural process that created this. Another thing that is hard for people to picture is that it's underground, and it was carved out by the motion of water underground, not above ground. Because we don't see it happening, it's hard for anybody to understand that. So I think when people finally get the idea that we didn't make this, it's not cement, it's not painted, that it's all natural. I mean, it's this huge hole in the ground. It's 900 feet long and 65 feet tall, and all these formations hanging off the walls and coming down from the ceiling and going up from the floor. So I think then it soaks in, and then they get really excited about it, and they're amazed too.
How do you feel about being part of that first year and then supervising as uncontrollable fellow guides the second year?
Well, for me, it was just like, it was maybe a little tougher to be a supervisor for people that I had previously worked with, but everybody was so good. Everybody wanted to be here that was here, and they loved the place, and they wanted to do a good job. So it really wasn't too much supervision. I was more or less just making a schedule, and everybody was doing what they already knew to do. I didn't have to go out there and say, you need to lead a tour. Everybody did their thing, and it was wonderful. I thought it was nice.
I feel we were blessed.
Yeah, I thought so too. Yeah, we were more than just lucky to have been in that first group. We were blessed to be here. It was a total shock for me because somebody who worked for the Forest Service in Russellville, Arkansas, was having film developed in Little Rock where my dad worked, and said there are vacancies up there. My dad came home and told me. That's how I found out about it. I applied for the job, went through an interview process, and was selected. So, I mean, I had been to Mountain View, I had been to some of the folk festivals, but other than that, I had not been up here at all. I didn't know anything about this, nothing about it. So, when I was hired, I was just amazed.
Wow.
And then after I saw what I would be working in, I was excited.
Yeah, I think we all got tapped on the shoulder on that.
That's right. You bet.
Thank you.
My name is Tim Ernst. It's Timernst, and I was one of the original tour guides. I was first hired at Blanchard Springs Caverns in 1973.
And do you give permission for us to use this for historical archives and for the newspaper art?
Yes, you may use whatever happens for historical or archival or newspaper, whatever.
So you are, as far as I'm concerned, the one who took the message out of this cave. You spent a lifetime as a conservationist. You got people in Arkansas excited about their natural heritage. I've never seen it. We left 30-something years ago. We came back. People are hiking, biking. They're not just hunting and fishing. Did your experience here have anything to do with how the purpose of your life, how you spent the rest of your life?
Oh, as a kid, literally right out of high school, I just graduated high school and I went to work here, and I had just really learned about the Forest Service from a book that I read, the first book I'd ever read from cover to cover in my life as a senior in high school, sad to say. And from that moment on, I wanted to work for the Forest Service, and I wanted to be outside in nature doing something, I didn't care what. And when I found out that they were actually going to pay people to work for the Forest Service and go into a cave, which I've always loved scrambling around in caves my whole life, I was just ecstatic. And I immediately applied to do this job, and I was quite honestly shocked when I came to work here that, number one, it was such a spectacular natural phenomenon, Blanchard Springs Caverns, but the way that the Forest Service had presented it to the public and had allowed us to present it to the public was, to me, very, very surprising that we were able to share such a thing as this with everybody and anybody that wanted to come see it. And yes, that literally was the foundation of what I've done for the last 50 years as far as my life and career, is to try and showcase and share with people, not just of Arkansas, but of anywhere, of the great beauty that we have in Arkansas in particular, not only on the surface, but of course here underground. And then also along the way, the training I got here at the very first few days that we were here, we learned about how the surface was connected to the underground, environmentally speaking, especially. And I've taken that and went out and started preaching, and just everything that I have done has tried to help people make that same connection that I got here, and help people try to gain an appreciation for what we have in the outdoors. And hopefully with that, whether they're outdoorsy people or not, at some point in the future, maybe they'll come up with a decision or a vote or something to maybe save a part of their town or, a park or something like that. And they might say, oh yeah, I remember that. I like the natural things. And every person can make a difference. And so that's kind of what I've done the last 50 years, is try to sort of, through the side door, usher as many people as I can in and grab them and say, this is beautiful, this is spectacular. Let them discover that themselves, and then let them go forward and continue to spread the word. So Blanchard is where all that started for me.
Wow, I was hoping that would be the answer, but I didn't know. Are you surprised at how much it has caught fire, the message that you took from here throughout your life?
Well, I think that in the 60s and 70s in this country, environmentalism really was taking root. And so that sort of came along at the same time as, and Blanchard was a part of it. The development of Blanchard, I don't think could have ever happened today. But I think in the 60s and then in the 70s when we opened, and yes, people were just, wow. But that kind of came along with, I like to blame John Denver for a lot of it, because to me, he was one of the guys that was out there singing it and living it and you know, showing us how spectacular it was out there, and that it was okay to put on a pair of waffle stompers and go to class or go to work and go outside and hike. Quite honestly, hiking back then came from the military. Backpacking was a military thing, and it wasn't really fun. And in the 60s, it started to turn more into a recreational thing. And then in the 70s, 60s and 70s, the Forest Service really pushed a lot of recreation in America instead of just the other 5 parts of the wood, water, wildlife, forage, and recreation, and timber management and such. So yeah, it was just kind of a big sweep that I could see, or that I remember, that was happening across the U.S. in Blanchard Springs, and me was a part of it, thank goodness.
Congratulations on what you've done.
Well, I don't know if I've done anything, but I hope that I have encouraged enough people to do the right thing, and if nothing else, get out and enjoy the great outdoors or the great underground, and realize that it belongs to all of us and it's worth protecting.
Receive the gift.
That's right, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you. State and spell your name and your title for that first year, and tell me if you give permission for the historical archives in the newspaper to use this.
Yes, you have permission. My name's David David Stephen Wesley. My dad's middle name was Sylvan, and I was tour guide supervisor here at Blanchard Springs Caverns in 1973. I was just here the 1 year, January until the next January.
Can you spell your name for me?
Okay, Westley.
And your first name?
David.
D-A-V-I-D?
D-A-V-I-D.
You tell me what it was like.
Well, it was very interesting and it was fun. Had a great bunch of, kids, young people to work with, and everybody was gung-ho and doing a good job. They did an excellent job, and it was an incredible experience that I can't say how much I enjoyed it, and but I can't believe it's been 50 years. That's the scary thing.
Whose idea was it to put us through all that extensive training? That's what everybody talks about.
Well, I presume that came from higher ups in the Forest Service. You know, maybe even higher than the supervisor's office in Russellville, maybe D.C., even Washington D.C. But it was some very good extensive training, and we all learned from it. And I know it was enjoyable. We had a lot of fun while we were doing it.
You have a special connection to this cave.
I would say that I do, because I got married here in January the 1st, 1974, in the cathedral room, and I had tour guides in attendance, and a Reverend Thurlow Lee performed the ceremony. We had to kind of speed it up, because even though it was January 1st, 2 people showed up to go on tour, and so we had to kind of hurry up and cut it short.
Wow, wow. So you were the first. Is it the only wedding in the cave?
No, I think there's been a second one, and I don't know when that was, but there was another one. I don't know when. Johnny would probably know, Johnny Thomas.
Pretty historic.
Yes, it was.
So did you take memories of this place with you for the rest of your career?
Oh, of course, because the people I work with are special. Of course, I met my wife in the Folk Center, and we loved it here. We'd come back, and visit, and we had the first reunion in 1983. Of course, my first wife had passed away before then in 1982, but it was quite an experience, and it's amazing. I had forgotten how just incredible the cave is, and I'd especially forgotten how steep the walk was on the slopes.
I was struck with it myself when I went in there. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
It's still stunning.
Yeah, incredible, amazing.
I guess it was when the Forest Service decided to embark on this, it was like, I'm sure there were a lot of people who said, well, isn't that a Park Service thing? Should we be doing a cave? What do you think?
It was kind of a first for the Forest Service, and I think they did a good job, and I'm glad that they did do it. I think as far as I know, it's the only one in the United States that's under Forest Service, U.S. Department of Agriculture Management, and it's just an amazing place.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Okay. Ann Richardson, I was one of the first guides at 1973 when the cave opened. So that makes us old and forgetful to begin with. So,
Can you spell your name for me, please?
Richardson.
And your first name?
Anna, A-N-N-A.
And can you tell me if you give permission for this to be used for the county archives and possibly for a newspaper story or even a radio story?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, Anna. Tell me something that you considered remarkable that first year that people who might see this 100 years from now, 50 years from now, even now might say, I had no idea about being the first in that first group to open Blanchard Springs Caverns to the public.
I thought it was just breathtaking when I stepped down on the bridge to see it for the first time. And it was so different because it was the first Forest Service cave. So it was built to teach, to help people to understand what a gift just nature had in this area. And it was fun to be some of the first people to go through it with other people as a guide.
The extensive training that you and the rest of us had, did that help you in not just then, but in your career as a teacher?
It did. You know, you wonder why they went to such a extravagant means to get us ready to be guides, but it was, you know, as a 20-year-old, it was, oh, okay, we'll do this. But yeah, I've seen places where it's really helped. They had outlined a good program.
How did it make you feel to impart what you felt about Blanchard Springs Caverns to people who came and saw the cave for the first time?
Well, I thought, you know, we would have audiences where they were just dumbstruck. You know, they wanted to hear every bit of information you had. Then we had others who were just cocky and didn't really care. Just wanted to say they'd been there, done that. So, yeah, it was wonderful when people were interested. It was a pain when they weren't.
It's hard to understand why someone would not be interested in that.
Oh, but we had them. You know, we definitely had those. But now, not so much in the beginning, because, you know, in the beginning there was a lot of fire among all of us, I think, to do the very best and present the very best. But as a second, I worked a third summer, so it was, you know, by then it was time to do something else.
Wow, I didn't have that perspective. I didn't know.
Yeah.
I mentioned in my remembrance that I didn't know anything about nature, natural systems like the cave. All I knew in biology in high school and even college was dissecting a frog. Did you learn something in being one of the first interpretive specialists there at Blanchard?
You know, I think we learned from each other, you know, the different ways that you present things. It was probably far more valuable than the actual instruction they gave us. But yeah, it was a wonderful experience, and it's, you know, I think for most of us it's affected the rest of our lives. So.
Can you tell me something that happened there in Mountain View, in the cave, on one of your tours, something that you'll never forget? Something that happened, a particular tour.
I would get you know, there were a lot of tour buses and older people at that time. So 20, and we're dealing with 75, 80 plus people, 80 plus year old people. And I would get a lot, "You look like my granddaughter," or "You sound like my granddaughter." But I got this one couple, the granddaughter had just passed away. I mean, they cried the whole tour. They were at the back with me. It was just, you know, it was something that they'd planned to do with the granddaughter, and they couldn't. So it was pretty memorable.
Did they connect with you?
Yes, they thought I sounded like her and looked like her. So they were just needing to get through that day, because they had promised her that they'd do that with her. I think she was like 11, really young.
What an honor.
It was pretty, yeah.
I'm Penny Preston. In 1973 at Blanchard Springs Caverns, I was Penny Tuck.
I'm Charles Preston, and in 1973 at Blanchard Springs Caverns, I was Charles Preston. But everybody knew me as Chuck.
So we both give you, or I give you permission to use this video and the audio for a newspaper article, for Wyoming Public Radio, and for the Stone County Archives, and if need be, for the Forest Service, or U.S. Forest Service Archives.
Yes, absolutely.
Blanchard Springs Caverns, 1973.
Yeah.
What would you like to tell people that they may be shocked at 100 years from now?
Well, I don't know if they'd be shocked or not, or even care, but I've got to say Blanchard Springs Cavern was a formative experience in my life, both professionally and personally. I'm a wildlife biologist, and my entire career has been about exploring, documenting, interpreting, and then sharing with the public, as well as the scientific community. And so Blanchard Springs really was an amazing preparation for that. Our training was amazing, wasn't it?
It was
I mean,
incredible.
it was spectacular. We had several weeks of training on everything from interpretation, that is natural history interpretation essentially, but also interpersonal relationships, as well as gosh, everything from CPR to first aid. But I think most important were the interpersonal relationships and interpersonal relations that we learned, and also the methods of interpretation, methods of really understanding your audience and making what you have to say accessible and interesting to them.
One of the things that amazed me when I first saw, the very first time I saw Blanchard Springs Caverns, the huge entry room, was that this was a mountain inside of a mountain. And I was a flatlander. I grew up in Dallas and then Pine Bluff, and I came to the mountains of Stone County, and I was stunned by the beauty of the mountains. And then we stepped into Blanchard Springs Caverns and saw this stunning, ancient beauty, the formations that had been formed over hundreds of thousands of years. And still there were living creatures in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a biologist, of course, I was especially interested in those creatures, in the salamanders and the bats, and even the cave crickets and amphipods that live in the cave. But like you, Penny, it was otherworldly to me when I first saw, especially the cathedral room and that giant column there. I said, my gosh, I have never seen anything like this. Never imagined anything like this could be below our feet. And I grew up in the Ozarks, or near the Ozarks. So I was vaguely aware that there were caves in this karst topography, but I had no idea of the breadth and just the physical impact and emotional impact it has on you.
I didn't know that there was something that we needed to tell our world about, which was the environment above the ground and below the ground, that it was important to our nation for us to preserve, protect, and interpret this incredible place, because that was a whole new concept to us. By 1973, I had started college, and I'd completed my high school degree. And in biology, we never studied wildlife or wild places. We studied how to dissect a frog. That was the extent of biology for us. And so this is a whole new concept. The other thing that was new to me there, and it's hard to explain to someone who didn't live in that time, but I had applied for a job with AT&T at the time, and I was told, even though I had the highest scores anyone had ever made on the test to try for the job, that I would not be allowed to take the job as an operator. They did have operators at AT&T then. I could not have the job unless I promised to be on the birth control and show them evidence, and promised to not go to college. So I had to make that promise before I accepted the job, so I left that job behind. But at Blanchard Springs Caverns, working for the U.S. Forest Service, females were treated with the same level of respect and opportunity as males. So that gave me the audacity to dream to be a broadcast journalist. And here I am, almost 50 years later. I started my broadcast journalism career in Northwest Arkansas, in Fort Smith, and then Fayetteville. In 1976, I am still doing television reports for regional, local, and national outlets. Mostly these reports are about Yellowstone and the events that happened there. You actually, you mentioned that you were a wildlife biologist. Tell them what else you did.
Well, I was after I received my doctorate at University of Arkansas at Fayetteville in zoology. That was in 1982, so almost 10 years after the Blanchard Springs experience. I became an associate professor, tenured professor at University of Arkansas at Little Rock. And, you know, I really missed public education. I loved the university environment. I loved academia in general, and my students, and the opportunity to do research and interpret that, you know, for my students. But I missed the public education aspect that I first really learned and became excited about at Blanchard Springs Caverns. And so when the Denver Museum of Natural History offered me a position there as a curator and chairman of the Department of Zoology, I went to Denver, and Penny came too. That's where after we'd lived in different places. We'd been married for a bit and commuting back and forth between Little Rock and Dallas.
We were married by Governor Bill Clinton, who went on to become president.
Yeah. And so I at the Denver Museum, and I stayed there for 8.5 years, loved that and loved the opportunity to continue my research, but at the same time share that with the public, in addition to the scientific community. And then I was offered the opportunity of a lifetime, or maybe several lifetimes, to go to Cody, Wyoming, next to Yellowstone, and create a brand new natural history museum, the Draper Museum of Natural History, at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. Boy, I drew on all of that, all of my background, but you know, really at the root of it all was that Blanchard Springs experience, and the way that we began to gather information there on our own, and share with the public. It was exciting to me then, and it remained. I'm still active. I'm officially retired from day-to-day duties as the founding and senior curator of the Draper Natural History Museum. But I'm still conducting research and still communicating with the public. We just did a lecture together for students and the public at Bradley University near Chicago, so we're still using what we learned way back when. But it was, you mentioned something a while ago about the work environment we had, and it was an exciting, it was engaging, and it was really an inspiring environment. There were 31 of us as guides, tour guides or naturalists through the cavern system, and just about an equal number of males and females. We had different age groups. Most of us were college age at the time, but there were some more mature folks from the community, some teachers, as a matter of fact, from throughout the state of Arkansas and beyond. And so it was it was a melting pot. I hate to use that term because it's so overused, but it really was. And because Mountain View at the time in 1973 was really such an isolated community. It helped us bond together and really get to know one another in different ways. And you know, I still look at that experience as inspiring again in so many different ways, informative in how I interact with people, not just as a professional, but just in my personal life. And I can't say enough about the experiences that I had there in 2 years. We were, of course, 1973, the opening year of the Caverns, and we both came back in 1974, and that's when we started dating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So last weekend, this is April, and last weekend we met with several of the guides, not all of them, but a few of them who had helped open Blanchard Springs Caverns that first summer in 1973 on July the 7th. And they all said to a person that this was a formative experience in their life. It was before Blanchard Springs and after Blanchard Springs. More important to me than my high school 50th or college, this was the beginning of joy and wonder for me in my life. And when we went through the cave, they took us on this special tour through the cave, led by the daughter of the
Von Ward.
Von Ward,
Yeah,
who was
boy, he was in the office. He was I'm
there
not sure
by
it was
himself. She
title.
said 1958.
That's right. He was with Forest Service and there since 1958, and boy, all of us got to know Vaughn because of his central position there in accounting and also, well, is it PR or
Yes.
HR,
Yeah.
human resources as well. Yeah.
But when I stepped inside that cave for the first time in several decades, last Saturday, I was stunned again by the beauty and the grandeur of this mountain inside a mountain.
Yeah, grandeur is a good word, and I had the same experience, and the smells, the sounds of dripping water, all brought back those memories, and really, again, just I keep using that word, but it's true. It's inspirational. It really is, and hopefully always will be. You know, I knew nothing before we began our training there. Knew nothing about airlock systems or why Carlsbad had dried, and how what great pains the U.S. Forest Service was taking to make sure that the Blanchard Springs did not dry out. There remained a living cave, even with the lighting system and everything else, and ways to protect the formations of the cave and also the wildlife of the cave. I was, especially the second year in 1974, I was doing an independent research project to finish my undergraduate degree in wildlife and biology. And I was measuring coliform bacteria in the cavern water system underneath where the bats, so many of the bats roosted, just to get a sense of a relative index to abundance of number of bats. The amount of coliform bacteria, in fact, turned out to be a pretty good indicator, a very general indicator of bat populations roosting above at particular times seasonally. So I did that and loved that. Spent a lot of time underneath in the what now is another tour, but at the time it was Wild Cave, and I went down after quite a bit of training and a few trips with the groups. I went down by myself often to collect those samples, and that was an experience in itself. And we had such an opportunity to explore other caves too.
Yes, wild caves at night. That's what
Yeah.
we did. Trekking miles through Blanchard throughout the day, taking tourists through the cave, and then at night we would spend
Yeah.
5, 6, 7, 8 hours in a wild cave at night, hoping that our carbide lamps would not go out before we could get out. Again, it was a mountain inside a mountain. It was often dangerous because sometimes the ledge that you would be walking on around the flowstone would be underwater, and if anybody stirred up the silt, then you couldn't see that ledge. And at one time, someone stepped off the ledge and went under the water. It was many feet deep at that point. and we often came out with mud up to our necks.
Yeah, and then
but
went
it was
to work.
worth it.
And then cleaned up and went to work the next morning. I mean, it was that much.
I think maybe we should end this, but one of the things that we had hoped to do, as well as excite people about this national treasure that they had 200 feet under their feet, we wanted to protect Blanchard, and we wanted to protect the creatures there, the salamanders, the cave crickets, the bats. Tell them what they told us about the bat populations then and now.
Well, yeah, they've grown more than fourfold, I think more than fivefold, as a matter of fact. Population now is something like 400,000 bats. It's in various species, I think 6 different species.
Then they said it was about 5,000?
It's about 5 or 10,000, I think, at most. We didn't have a real good handle on the exact number back then.
It was your job to count them.
Well, it was my job to at least find a way to count them. or get a relative index to abundance.
Not 1, 2, 3. No.
Yeah. But yeah, it's true, and Penny hit on this before. Conservation was a big message, and of course it was a sign of the times. Early 1970s, late 60s, early 70s, we were just really becoming, as a society, environmentally aware. Yeah, and with new legislation coming out, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, and beyond. And as a wildlife biologist that morphed later in my career as more of a conservation biologist, it was such a critical time, and I remember one of the first, I wouldn't call it a lesson really, but messages that I sent on my tours was talking about how everything is connected. And so I connected the sun. We were 216 feet underground, and we were standing next to a bat guano pile, and I said, the sun is the king in here, even though none of the creatures in here, while they're in here, sees it. But the bats eat insects outside that have fed on vegetation that is nourished by the sun. Bring that nourishment, bring the nutrition back here into the cave that feeds amphipods and cave crickets that will never see the sun, perhaps. And that very small story of interconnectedness is really the essence of ecology itself and what I've been doing over most of my career. So it was a real learning experience for me.
State and spell your name and your title in relation to this.
In relation to the cave?
Right.
Okay. Ann Richardson. I was one of the first guides at 1973 when the cave opened. So that makes us old and forgetful to begin with. So
Can you spell your name for me, please?
Richardson.
And your first name?
Anna, Anna.
And can you tell me if you give permission for this to be used for the county archives and possibly for a newspaper story or even a radio story?
Yes, that's fine.
We were grateful and blessed to be among the first tour guides to help open Blanchard Springs Caverns in 1973, and I brought the greatest gift of my life from that cave.
We were the only two of the original guides that were married to one another. Married to one another.
Stan Ott and Marilyn Martin. Marilyn Martin, they were married later, and he came later that summer.
Did.
He was there in 1973.
He was in 1973, I think in September of 73.
Right.
So he was, I consider him one of the originals, really.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. So yeah, that's right. And we didn't start dating until that second year.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we didn't get married for 10 years after.
That's right. You said I wasn't ready for marriage, but which is probably true at the time. One other thing I really want to talk about very briefly is Mountain View itself and the community, the county. It was, at that time I mentioned before, one of the most isolated communities, also let's say one of the least wealthy communities in the country, as a matter of fact. And so that isolation carried with it a certain charm.
Purity.
Beauty. And purity is a good word. Again, one that may be overused, but I think there was a purity there. And I knew nothing about mountain music or old-time music at the time. We We enjoyed that very much, enjoyed the people, getting to know the people of Stone County, and they accepted us. Sometimes I wonder why. We were a little different, I think, than the average Stone County residents, but we're accepted by this wonderful community, and it has, I wouldn't say it's lost its charm, but it's lost some of that isolation, of course, as time has moved on.
Thank you for
Yeah.
letting us talk about Blanchard.
Yeah, a great place, an amazing place, and really a living laboratory, which is so important in our world today.
My name is Marilyn Martin Ott, and I had the privilege of leading the first public tour through Blanchard Springs Caverns on July 7th of 1973. Blanchard was the first federal cave that was publicly operated by the United States Department of Agriculture. There were other federal caves, most notably Carlsbad and Mammoth, but they were operated by the Department of Interior. And the mission of the Department of Interior was preservation of natural treasures, while the Department of Agriculture mission was stewardship and conservation. So in 1973, the United States Forest Service, as an agency of the Department of Agriculture, took the approach that Blanchard was a cavern system that was intimately connected and dependent on surface land conservation and stewardship. This meant that the first group of tour guides were given the task of communicating that Blanchard was a living cave, having organisms dependent upon clean surface water. And we were encouraged to interpret cave ecology, hydrology, and geology to visitors by using the best communication technique that we had. Our original tour guide training in 1973 was a 3-week intensive course in cave interpretation, features, communications, interpersonal relationships, transactional analysis, and an expertise in safety features and a working knowledge of the facility's operation and maintenance. That's a pretty heavy load for a group of college students and teachers in a summer job. The original 31 tour guides included a group of 7 permanent professional United States Forest Service employees, but the bulk of the staff were temporary summer hires, of whom I was one. Each guide was encouraged to decide how his or her tour was to be structured and how to go about moving from certain spots at certain times, with the understanding that the main attraction wasn't the tour guide, but was Blanchard Springs Caverns. Rather than be entertainers for the tour, our responsibility was to teach, with a sensitivity to the wants and the needs of the group. Blanchard itself was the entertainer, and there was nothing wrong with an approach of just quiet reverence upon entering the cave system. That's probably why that initial room was called the Cathedral Room. And as the first public tour guide, I remember letting my group of visitors stand on the first bridge quietly. When they entered and listened to the sound of water and felt the coolness and the gentle movement of air currents through the cave and were able to view the massive room, it created a sense of awe. And it's still a very moving experience for me today. We tour guides were encouraged to use our own gifts and talents to enhance our tours. Individuals who were naturally funny could use humor and convey a point. Individuals who were musical sang in the cave to demonstrate the effects of vibration on limestone. Dramatic tour guides could tell riveting stories about Hugh Shell and Hale Bryant, the original discoverers of the cave. One biology student even had the uncanny ability to find wildlife on every tour and point it out. The benefit of not having a canned speech for a tour was that each tour was different. Visitors could travel through the Dripstone Trail several times and have a different experience each time, dependent upon which tour guide they had. One of the recurring training themes was that we were representing the United States Forest Service and were public servants. It was emphatic that we understood we were the visible face of the federal government to visitors who came on our tours. I was even told to use the first person on tour. For example, we constructed the trail rather than they constructed the trail. In other words, we were they. And it could become a little bit confusing because people would literally think that I carried concrete on my back. But the point was that we wanted to make the federal government more personal to the taxpayers. And by extension of that, that the cavern was truly their investment too, and worthy of being preserved and being invested in. Obviously, it goes without saying that one of the main jobs of a successful tour guide is to bring the entire group safely from the cavern. There was immense training on first aid, fire safety, CPR, law enforcement, emergency evacuations, and handling difficult visitors. I always felt a serious responsibility for the 30 lives entrusted to me on each tour, and I remember one of the summer guides telling me she prayed before each tour for the safety of each person on her tour. I'm really thankful that I never had to manage a visitor with a severe illness or a major crisis. Those are the battle stories that tour guides told in the guide lounge, but fortunately, they were very rare. I know in 1973, the United States Forest Service took a chance in hiring 31 individuals to shepherd thousands of visitors through Blanchard Springs Caverns and help them understand part of the amazing world below. And although I was honored to have been among the first, there have been a very long, long line of great people who've managed this public trust very well and will continue to manage it. Thank you.